Alfred Tennyson's poem "The Charge of the Light Brigade" was published in 1854. The poem is divided into 6 stanzas that vary from 6 to 12 lines each. While the poem cannot be easily classified as far as its meter or rhythm structure, the dominant rhythm in the poem is dactylic. A dactyl is a metric unit consisting of one stressed syllable followed by two unstressed syllables. When Tennyson uses two dactyls to a line, the effect is that the poem thunders boldly like a war drum. The rhyme scheme is uneven, sometimes strongly linking 3 lines in a row, skipping a line or two, then returning to the rhyme. Sometimes the rhymes are not perfect. Let's see the summary of the poem. The beginning lines of the poem throw the reader into the center of action with a rousing chant that drives the reader, both in its description and in its galloping rhythm, toward the battle. A league is approximately 3 miles long. Charging horses could cover half a league in a few minutes. The audiences of the time of the poem would have been familiar with the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War, upon which the poem is based, and would have known from the beginning that they were charging to their own doom. The poem suggests that it is these moments before the battle has begun that are the brigade's greatest glory. The phrase Valley of Death refers to an episode of John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress and to Psalm 23 from the Old Testament of the Bible. In both of these sources, faith makes people brave when they are faced with death. In the earliest published version of this poem, printed in the London Examiner on December 9, 1854, the command to charge forward was attributed to Lord Nolan, a well-known military figure of the time. In changing the speaker to an anonymous he, the poet shifts the focus of the poem away from individual actions and decisions onto matters of record and onto the roles played by followers and leaders in military situations everywhere. In addition to obscuring the identity of the speaker, this final version of the poem changes the command given from "taken the guns" to "charge for the guns." This heightens the sense of the danger of the charge while leaving unstated the reason for charging into the blaring gunfire. No sooner does line 9 repeat the shouted command that sends the Light Brigade to their doom than line 10 makes the reader wonder whether any of the soldiers were stricken with fear upon hearing the command. Although we currently closely associate the word dismay with shock, its actual meaning includes a loss of courage. By raising this issue as a question and then answering that no, there was no fear, Tennyson gives the reader a moment's pause to let the full extent of the soldier's bravery sink in. Line 11 and line 12 tell the reader without question that every member of the brigade knew that this order was a mistake. This contradiction, the fact that the soldiers knew they were likely to die because of a blunder in military strategy, yet charged forward without fear anyway, gives the poem a psychological depth that would be lost if it merely celebrated the loyalty of soldiers who were unaware of the faulty command they were following. Lines 13 through 15 repeat each other in the way they phrase the rules these soldiers live by. The style suggests the regimented militaristic way the members of the Light Brigade think as they ride ahead, and the effect of the strong use of repetition is to drown out concerns about the blunder mentioned in the previous stanza. Theirs but to do and die says that the soldiers are actually supposed to die. This might seem contrary to the purpose of fighting, but Tennyson makes it clear that this is the belief of the charging soldiers, for whom such a fate would be the ultimate expression of loyalty. In lines 16 and 17, the perspective shifts from what the soldiers think of their mission to a view of the overall battle situation, again repeating the image of the Valley of Death. The first three lines of the stanza are virtually identical, changing only the location of the cannons, presenting the layout of the battlefield visually, instead of simply stating the fact that there were cannons all around. By repeating the phrase three times, the reader is not only given information about the tremendous odds against the Light Brigade, but the poem gives the feeling of being surrounded. Stormed in line 22 extends the image of thundered from the line before it, making the barrage of cannon fire aimed at the cavalrymen appear almost like a force of nature. Line 23 makes a point of mentioning that the soldiers of the Light Brigade were brave, but also that they rode their horses well. Their skill is mentioned almost as an afterthought, though, and this is the only place in the poem that it is brought up. The reason for this is that this poem makes its reader analyze the battle almost entirely in terms of attitude, not ability. In lines 24 to 26, Tennyson expands a phrase that was used to end the first two stanzas instead of the geographic valley of death. He uses the metaphor jaws of death and extends this metaphor with mouth of hell, treating death as the same thing as hell and making both as real as an animal's attack. The poem heightens the viciousness of death on the battlefield. The next stanza celebrates the Light Brigade's control over the battle at its beginning. They ride on to the enemy using their sabers against opponents armed with cannons and pistols and are able to break through the front line of defense. The pistols and rifles of the day would have been useless to the members of the Light Brigade because they required reloading with a very complicated procedure that involved measuring gunpowder and pellets, which would have been impossible for a man on horseback. Sending a cavalry unit into the confined space of a valley against guns was so obviously hopeless that it may be this and not the brigade's initial success that is referred to the line "all the world wondered" appears in the middle of a vivid battle scene. In this stanza, the Light Brigade takes such complete control of the situation that their opponents, the Cossacks and Russians, find their defensive line torn apart and have to retreat, while the 600 cavalry members, who have by this time stared into the barrels of guns and cannons, continue to press forward bravely. The first five lines of the next stanza override any optimism the reader may have gotten from the Light Brigade's initial success. By using the same words as were used in stanza 3, the poem takes the reader back to the same sense of hopelessness that was established before the battle began. The brief victory that was gained in the fourth stanza has made no difference in the overall scope of the battle. The first time these words were used, though they ended with the claim of the soldiers' boldness and skill, this time they end with the soldiers being shot down. The path that the Light Brigade charged into, the jaws of death, the mouth of hell, is mentioned again as the survivors make their escape. The survivors of this battle are raised to heroic status by the words that this poem uses to describe the valley's entrance. The focus of the poem shifts in this stanza from describing the battle scene to addressing the reader directly. In using the description "wild to marvel to the charge," line 51 implies that thoughtless bravery is to be admired in and of itself, regardless of concerns about strategy or success. Repeating the line "all the world wondered" in line 52 adds to the idea that what the soldiers have done goes beyond the average person's comprehension. The soldiers are following rules that those who rely on intellect over loyalty might not understand. Although a close reading of the tone of this poem can leave little question about how we are meant to feel about these cavalrymen, the poem does not rely upon a reader's understanding of the subtleties of tone, but directly tells the reader in line 53 and line 55 to honor these soldiers. That the poem is so straightforward about its intent is an indicator that it was written for common, often uneducated audience to celebrate the actions of common soldiers who understood what they were being asked to do better than the blundering military strategists who planned the attack. The soldiers of the Light Brigade are not portrayed in this poem as having any illusions that their attack made sense. In the second stanza, we see that they were aware of the fact that their charge was not the result of sound strategy, but of a blunder. But what is a soldier to do when commands do not seem correct? For officers, military training is about developing strategies, but the soldier is trained to follow the strategies that are given to him. Often, the actions that soldiers are required to perform will not seem to them to serve any useful function. Soldiers do not have full intelligence about what is going on at other places at the same time, and they are not informed about what the army's overall intention is or where one order might fit into the overall plan. Sometimes soldiers will be called upon to risk certain death, and they need to have faith that their action will be good for the overall cause in ways they cannot see. The ability to obey such commands blindly is the essence of military training. In this poem, that faith is lacking. The cavalrymen can see clearly that there is no hidden benefit to their charge. Tennyson does not say that they suspected a blunder or felt sure of one, but only that they knew. With no benefit to the charge and certain death, the prize, it would make sense for the soldiers to disobey their command. But Tennyson presents the obedient soldiers as heroes to a society that values independent thought, where reason is the ultimate guide. The heroism of these men can be hard to follow. There is no doubt that they are courageous, charging right into the face of danger, but absurd courage does not merit the sort of praise Tennyson showers on the Light Brigade. Military society, though, is not like the average society. It does not value reason and independence above all else. It values loyalty. For Tennyson, to say that there is no reason for these soldiers to be loyal to the blundering commanders was actually a way of recognizing the nature of their heroism. They are loyal in spite of the presence or absence of reason. Their loyalty is pure and untainted by any other ideas.